Hello students, let us start this session with the introduction of the chapter Life Processes. So when we talk about the chapter Life Processes, first thing we have to understand what is the meaning of this word that is called as life. In the chapter also, you will understand that there is an introduction given to you key. How do we tell the difference between what is alive and what is not alive? Alive मतलब कौन जिंदा है and what is not alive means how can we say that something is not living and how it is or something is living. So if we see a dog running, a cow chewing curd, or a man shouting loudly on the street, we know that these are the living beings. Obviously we can give as many examples apart from these to understand कि some objects are living, they show some kind of behavior, they show some kind of activities, and some they do not. So what if the dog or the cow or the man were asleep? So at the same time, when any object, if it is not showing an activity, is this a living or non-living? So when we say that a person, if he is sleeping, an animal when it is sleeping, when it is not doing an activity, still we call them as living creatures. So what makes them living? We see them breathing and we know that they are alive. So the first thing that we understand that breathing might be the basis of living. But at the same time, what about plants? प्लांट्स को देखकर हम बोल सकते हैं कि whether they are living or non-living. No, we see them green. Some of us will say yes. So if they are green, we can say that the plants are alive. But what if they are having the brown stem? They are having the brown leaves. So if the color of the leaves other than green are present, then are they alive? Are they living? No. So sometimes we think that some sort of movement, either growth related or not, as common evidence for being alive. If any organism, any object is showing some growth, then apart from breathing, we can say that movement can be also related to justify an object for being alive. But plant, do they grow? Do they move? Do they show any kind of movement? If not, क्या plants living नहीं हैं? So breathing and movement, though they are a part or they are some kind of attributes for telling that some objects are living, but yes, to some point, at some point, we may also say that they are not completely defining a living being. So using visible movement as a definition characteristic of life is not enough. So movements are very small scales which will be invisible to the naked eye. So if we say that plant is not moving, so is it living? So can we say that inside the plant there are cells, and inside the cells there must be lot of movements taking place. The plants are having xylem, phloem, and the movement of the substances within these cells, the biochemical pathways going inside the cells, are these not attributing to that statement that is a living? So when we talk about the movement of molecules, for example, this movement of molecules is also necessary for life. So external behavior, external visible characteristics, they may not be justifying that the plant or animal is living, but yes, every organism is having some internal movements that take place within the cell of its. So that definitely makes it alive. In fact, viruses do not show any molecular movement in them. So viruses, they are as such not called as living organisms. because they do not have any cellular structure. They do not show any internal movement. But are they living? If they are living, then how do they behave and how do they show their behavior? We know that viruses can only behave as living creatures if they transfer their genetic material to the living host. Outside the living host, a virus is considered to be non living. So, the most important attribute apart from breathing, movement, physical movement, is the internal molecular movements. So, why are molecular movements needed for life? These molecular movements are attributed or they are understood by studying the tissues, because tissues are formed by the cells. Cells have smaller components in them, and that is called as the cell organelles. These cell organelles, they perform different type of functions within a cell, and these different type of functions are very important to carry out any kind of living attribute. Like if we talk about the digestion, we say that we chew the food is getting digested inside the body, inside the stomach or in the small intestine, and then it is absorbed, but ultimately it is going into the cell where the breakdown of the food is taking place, the absorption of the food is taking place, the absorption of the nutrients taking place. So that is where we can say that the cells are very important, and the cell organelles, they finally show the essence of the word that is called as a living, because they are showing internal movements. If the order breaks down, the the organisms will no longer be alive. So there is an order to be followed, there is a hierarchy to be followed, and this hierarchy, it definitely tells us that whether the organism is actually living or non-living. Now let us understand what are the various life processes that we have to understand. Students, whenever we say that the maintenance functioning of the living organism must go on even when they are not doing anything in particular, the maintenance functions of living organisms, what do we understand by that? As we have just seen previously, that even if we are just asleep, the maintenance work goes on, our breathing process go on, our heart never stops beating, our kidney never stops functioning, the stomach, it never stops churning the food. If we have just taken the food, if we have consumed the food, so the energy production, the digestion, the transportation, the waste production and removal of the waste, it does not stop even if we are asleep. So physically, in external form, we may not be showing any kind of movement, we may not be showing any kind of a justification to the living being, but internally all the processes are going on in a very orderly way. Thus we can say that we are living, and the word living is just because of the various physiological activities that is taking place inside the living organism, and that makes up the life processes. Thus we can say define a process called life processes in this way. The processes which together perform this maintenance job are called as the life processes. Why are these maintenance processes needed? These maintenance processes are needed to prevent the damage and breakdown, and to do so energy is always required. Where is this energy coming from? Energy comes from outside the body of the individual organism. For example, plants, they require some amount of energy from external source, and that external source is the sun. If sun provides the energy to the plants, the same energy is converted to chemical energy by the process of photosynthesis. So, there must be a process of transfer of a source of energy from outside of the body to the organism. So, if such transfer of energy can take place in by inorganic manner or inorganic way. Like transfer of energy through the sun to the plants is inorganic way. It is not having any organic nature related to it. But if we eat the products of the plant, the food produced by the plant, consumed by the animals and the humans, that is an organic way of transfer of the food or transfer of the energy. So, if the size of the organisms is to grow, additional raw material will be also needed from outside. Since life on the earth depends upon carbon based molecules, most of these food resources are also carbon based. So, most of the organic materials or organic substances required by the organisms to continue their life or to produce energy are carbon based, and that is why we can say that carbon is one of the most abundant element on this earth. Depending upon the complexity of these carbon sources, different organisms can use different kinds of nutritional processes. So, nutritional processes, whenever we talk about the energy production, and the basis of the energy production is the nutrients, and nutrients always comes from the food that an organism consumes, whether the organism is preparing its food or an organism is consuming the already prepared food. The basis of the energy production always remains as the nutrients or the food. The outside sources of energy could be quite varied since the environment is not under the control of the individual organism. These sources of energy therefore needed to be broken down or built up in the body. So, the sources of energy has to be either built up in the body just like plants do, or the sources of energy should be broken down by the organisms like an animal or humans do. So, on that basis, you will come to know in further topics how this nutrition plays a very vital role, and that it becomes a most important life processes. So, when it is built, the food is actually built or it is broken down, it must be finally converted to a uniform source of energy that can be used for the various molecular movements needed for the maintaining of the life structures. So, when this maintenance job has to be done, this, as I've told you, it always takes place inside the cells of the living body, and that is where we can say number of chemical reactions taking place. And because these chemical reactions are taking place within a living cell, that is why they are also called as the biochemical reactions. And some of these biochemical reactions are always oxidizing and reduction reactions. So, that is called as the redox reactions. And that is the most common chemical means to break down the molecules. Like for many organisms, they use oxygen sourced from outside. For example, we living beings like the human beings and the animals and the plants and the microbes, all of them they require oxygen to break down the food they consumed to produce the energy. This process of acquiring oxygen from outside the body and to use it in the process of breaking down of the food resources for cellular needs is what we call as respiration. So, what we have understood earlier, that first of all, absorption of the nutrients is important, food is important, so nutrition is important, and after the nutrition is acquired, then that nutrition has to be broken down in the presence of the oxygen, and that process is called as respiration. In the case of single cell organism, no specific organs for taking food, exchange of gases, removal of waste may be needed, because entire surface of organism is in contact with the environment. it forms a very important question. Further we will discuss it in different method in different class, but right now we have to understand कि the complexity of the organism is the next important attribute to say that how these energy resources are consumed or how much amount of energy has to be spent or is required by the organism. But what happens when body of the size of the organism increases and the body design becomes more complex? In multicellular organisms, all the cells may not be in direct contact with the surrounding environment. So, the simple diffusion will not meet the requirements of all the cells. Students, this paragraph is very important. So, we will discuss this paragraph later in detail and more questions I will be telling you कि किस तरह के questions इसमें से बन सकते हैं. But now let us understand this at this particular paragraph is very important. So, multicellular organisms, various body parts have specialized functions they perform. So, multicellular organisms, they have many cells, and when if they have many cells, each cell performs different or a group of cells they perform a different type of functions, and thus वो क्या बनाते हैं? They form tissues. So different tissues also get together to form a particular function, that they form organs and organ systems are formed. इससे क्या होता है? The cells are not in direct contact with the environment, but they are highly arranged in a highly complicated way, and that is where a simple diffusion means movement of substances from higher concentration to the lower concentration merely is not sufficient. तो वहाँ पर क्या होता है? Specialized tissues are important for the transportation of the substances. So, first was nutrition, next is respiration, and then the transport of the substances from one part of the body to the another part of the body, and that is where the transportation, the transportation, how these organisms are have developed themselves, have become more and more complex in their physical form to help these movement of substances from one part to the other part becomes important. So transportation is one of the very important life processes. तो इसी में हम पढ़ेंगे कि how heart is able to transport blood, is able to play an important role in transportation of the blood, how blood vessels are important in transportation of the different types of blood in the animals like oxygen rich blood and carbon dioxide rich blood, what is the importance of having 2-chambered heart or 3-chambered heart and 4-chambered heart. So in this way we will build up on the concepts gradually in the coming up topics. When chemical reactions use the carbon source and the oxygen for energy generation, they create byproducts, means they produce wastes. They are not usually useless for the cells of the body but could even be harmful. So whenever these biochemical reactions take place in the cells, they definitely produce lot of waste products, and these waste products are definitely not good for the cells or the organisms, so they should be removed. These waste byproducts are therefore needed to be removed. So if the removal will not be taking place, then they may cause lot of physical and physiological problems. Some biochemical activities or reactions can stop, and that will lead to some other harmful effects on the working ability of the living organism, and that is where the fourth very important attribute for the life processes becomes evident, and that is excretion. Excretion का मतलब क्या होता है? To remove the waste products from the body of the organism. So If the basic rules for the body design in multicellular organisms are followed, a specialized tissue for excretion will be developed. Simply, some small organisms like some worms, like earthworms, they may excrete out their waste through simple excretory organs. But in the similar way, when we talk about the unicellular organisms, or we can say the single cell organisms, simple diffusion will remove the waste from the body. But in higher organisms, we may find some complicated advanced organs are present, और उनको जैसे बोलते हैं kidneys are very important organs in the humans, in the fishes, in amphibians and the birds. So the complexity of the organs will gradually develop or advance in the case of in the case of animals. So in this introduction हमने क्या देखा कि what is life processes, what are the different ways in which we can say that an organism is living or non-living, and we have also seen what are the four major activities that take place inside the living organism that makes them called as the life processes. So what are they? The first is nutrition, second is breathing or respiration, third is transportation, and the fourth one is excretion. So we can proceed further, and we will do the first topic of the chapter, like nutrition, in our next class. Thank you.